Let's look at project performance domains. Again, keep in mind, we are in PMBOK 7. And PMBOK 7, or a guide to the PMBOK, defines 8 project performance domains. Now, this is different from our discussion with respect to PMBOK 6. There, a guide to the PMBOK was defined as 10 knowledge areas. So we've shifted our focus from the concept of knowledge areas to performance domains. PMBOK 7 defines a project performance domain as a group of related activities that are critical for the effective delivery of project outcomes. The 8 project performance domains are as follows: stakeholders, team, development approach and lifecycle, planning, project work, delivery, measurement, and uncertainty. Let's take a closer look at the project performance domains. Stakeholders. The stakeholder performance domain includes activities and functions associated with the stakeholder. As we have defined earlier, a stakeholder is an individual, a group, an organization that is affected by or affects the project or is perceived to be affected by the project. Stakeholders can be end users, the project team, various business units. There are many examples. They can be internal and they can be external stakeholders. The project performance domain related to stakeholders has several outcomes. So these activities that are performed within the stakeholder performance domain lead to the following outcomes: productive working relationships with our stakeholders. So activities undertaken to find ways of identifying our stakeholders, understanding their expectations, how we can effectively communicate with them, their needs with respect to the project and what they contribute, their influence and power and interest in the project. We have to define those elements in order to be able to have a productive working relationship, even if the stakeholder is perceived to be a negative, uninterested, and non-influential party. The outcomes also include agreements on the outcomes themselves, the project outcomes. We should find means of support and satisfaction with the stakeholders that benefit from the project. And we need to reduce and eliminate negative impacts of stakeholders that may oppose the project. As I mentioned previously, projects are a quote unquote team sport. They're a group of individuals that have come together and that will collaborate on various activities within the project to deliver the outcome successfully. The team performance domain then includes activities and functions that are associated with the people that are responsible for and performing the project work, i.e., the project deliverables. And the outcome of these activities is a establishment and a sense of shared ownership, the development of a high-performing, successful, and collaborative team, and the necessary and applicable leadership and interpersonal skills that are demonstrated by the team members themselves. The third performance domain is development approach and lifecycle. The development approach and lifecycle performance domain includes activities and functions that are associated with the development approach and lifecycle phases of the project. So if we recall, we indicated that every project has a beginning and an end, and some things that happen in the course of that initialization through to the completion of the project. And it's at its most basic, a life cycle, a simple life cycle can consist of starting the project, planning the project, doing the work of the project, and closing the project. And those are the 4 most basic quote unquote phases of a project. But a project life cycle can be unique and is often, if the organization has a project management office that oversees and governs the planning and execution of projects, a unique life cycle that is indicative and that it fits its model in terms of the delivery of projects. As well, projects can be delivered in multiple approaches. We can deliver all of the requirements at once, and we plan the work, design, develop, test, and implement in sequence. This is often referred to as the waterfall approach, or another way of looking at it is predictive approaches to developing and delivering on the work. Or we can chunk out the requirements so that we deliver in phases or in increments. We can also have an approach where, again, we deliver all of the requirements of the project in a single implementation, but that maybe it goes through multiple iterations of design and develop and test, design, develop, and test until we have uh, you know, created an outcome that is one that meets all the requirements and it is a close enough to perfect solution. Or we can develop in a more traditional agile approach. So iterative and incremental, i.e., something that is often referred to as the Scrum approach to delivery. The outcomes include an approach that is consistent with the project deliverables, life cycle phases from beginning to end, which connect business and stakeholder value, and a project life cycle that facilitates the cadence and development approach required to produce those project deliverables. The planning project performance domain. The planning performance domain includes activities and functions associated with the organization and coordination that is necessary for the delivery of project deliverables and outcomes. The outcomes include a project that is well organized and coordinated, a holistic approach to delivery, time spent in planning that is in line with the project complexity, priority, and intended outcomes. This is just a fancy way of saying that the more complex the project is, the more time is required in our planning phase in order to be able to understand the project well and plan accordingly its design, development, and implementation. We're also seeking to develop and have on hand planning information that is sufficient to manage the stakeholders. And the project has a plan to adapt and evolve as conditions change. The project work performance domain includes activities and functions associated with establishing project processes, managing the resources, and this is equipment and or people, and fostering a learning environment. The outcomes include an efficient and effective project performance, processes, i.e. project management processes and other that are appropriate for the project and its environment. So this goes back to the Goldilocks principle of not too much and not too little project management, but just enough. It also ensures that we have the appropriate level of communications with stakeholders. What information is required? When do they require that information? How will they receive the information? And in what format? So that we can effectively manage our stakeholders. The efficient management of resources. Resources, whether it be material or equipment, tools, or people resources, may also come from outside of our organization. And so this also involves effective management of procurements. And finally, because we are dealing with people and people working within a team, we also need to ensure that we can improve team performance. And that means continuous learning and process improvement. That means effectively managing our team members, managing their performance, and taking the right corrective actions when the performance is not in line with that is required to deliver successfully. The delivery performance domain includes activities and functions that are associated with delivering the scope and quality that the project was undertaken to achieve. The outcomes include a project that contributes to the business objectives, a project that realizes its outcomes as it is intended to deliver, the project achieves the benefits that it was intended to deliver, the project has a clear understanding of the requirements, and that the stakeholders are in a position to accept and are satisfied with the deliverables of the project. The measurement performance domain includes activities and functions that are associated with assessing project performance and undertaking of actions to correct deviations from our plan. The outcomes include reliable understanding of the status of the project, objective data to help facilitate decisions, and timely and appropriate actions to keep a project on track with respect to scope, time, and cost. Uncertainty. The uncertainty performance domain includes activities and functions that are associated with risk and uncertainty. The outcomes of these activities and functions include a proactive exploration and response to uncertainty, the awareness of the interdependencies of project variables, the ability to anticipate threats and capitalize on opportunities, and to deliver a project with a minimal negative impact from unforeseen events. So here is what is absolutely important to understand between these project performance domains. The activities and the functions are interactive, interrelated, and interdependent. Project domains must work in unison, they must run concurrently, and the underlying activities are determined by the context of the organization, the project team, the stakeholders, and other factors. So if all of these things are interrelated and interdependent, then how do we connect the idea of project management principles, project performance domains, and things that we've talked about in class like tools, and models, and techniques, and what, if anything, comes as a result of the application of these various activities and functions, i.e., deliverables or artifacts. So, the way that these things are interconnected is that the principles of project management guide our behavior and give us the rules and norms on how we engage with stakeholders, for example, what leadership principles are, how we manage uncertainty, and other things that we had seen. The project performance domains have particular outcomes. So, for example, the team domain, as we saw, is about establishing a well developed, well uh, constructed project team that is able to deliver on the project activities and the deliverables. And we apply various models, methods to be able to get to those various outcomes. So if you recall when I said that often students may struggle behind the differences of PMBOK 6 and PMBOK 7, and we've gone from process groups to project management principles. We've gone from the notion of knowledge areas to these performance domains. But it's just a way of categorizing much of the models and the methods that are required, right, to be able to do the work that's necessary to plan and deliver on projects. And along the way, we produce various artifacts and or deliverables. They could be product related deliverables, but there's also project related deliverables, like a project charter, like a risk register, like a stakeholder register, a set of business requirements or a requirements list, user stories. Like all of these things are outcomes, and they're outcomes regardless of whether it's a knowledge area or project performance domain. And rather than getting caught up in performance domains or knowledge areas, it's really important to understand is there certain things that have to happen in every single project. We have to know who our stakeholders are. We have to be able to gather requirements and define scope. We have to be able to translate that in that work that needs to happen into a viable schedule, a realistic and meaningful schedule. We need to determine what the cost of all of these project activities will be. We have to be able to engage with stakeholders. We have to be able to manage a team and understand concepts of motivation and influence and power and how we move people along and manage them accordingly. We also have to look at what our resources are and how we obtain those resources. And resources, again, could be equipment or materials or human resources. And sometimes those resources are not within our organization. And so we have to go external to the organization. And the concepts of procurement come up. If you go back to the previous slides where I walk through these project performance domains, and you think about sort of the definition of what happens in uh, those knowledge areas that we talk about, you'll see that the outcomes that we need to achieve for any given project are all there. They're just organized differently. Some of the outcomes that were, let's say, specific to resources might appear in multiple places now in these performance domains, but they're still there. And the easiest way to kind of get your mind wrapped around this is not to get caught up too much unless you're angling towards a certification, not to get caught up too much on the terminology and how things are organized, just to be able to develop and say, if I have to define scope, what are those critical models or methods or tools or skills that I need to apply in order to be able to define the scope of a project? And as I apply those models, methods, tools, and skills, certain things get created. Like, for example, a requirements list or a work breakdown structure that organizes the work in a meaningful way. Those are the things that are important, not necessarily how they're organized. When you have a chance, have a closer look at the appendix. I've provided some glossary in terms and definitions, but there's also a couple of examples that hopefully further strengthen your understanding of the interrelation between principles, performance domains, what we mean by methods and models, and what we have in terms of deliverables or artifacts. So in summary, we talked about 12 principles of project management: guidelines, norms, rules of engagement, best practices. It's to be a diligent, respectful, and caring steward, to create a collaborative team environment, to effectively engage with our stakeholders and focus on value, to recognize and evaluate and respond to systems interactions because all of these things are interconnected, to demonstrate the right leadership behaviors and approaches and principles, to understand that projects are unique and therefore we need to tailor based on the content of the project and its uniqueness. We need to understand that our processes and the deliverables need a certain standard of quality that is built into them. We need to be able to navigate complexity and optimize our responses to risk that comes as a result of that complexity. And because projects, regardless of the plan, never go according to plan, we have to be able to be adaptable and resilient in the face of changes, and to recognize that in order to successfully deliver the outcomes of the project, it's not enough to simply deliver the new application or the process, but we have to be able to ensure that we can achieve the envisioned future state. And that means whatever the project delivers, the end users have to adopt it, they have to be able to use it, be taught and trained to use it effectively. Otherwise, we do not achieve and cannot achieve the value. The purpose will not be addressed for which it was undertaken. The models are numerous. And in class, we will talk about some of the models that are available to us that come from the wide project management body of knowledge. And as I talked about in class, that there are many disciplines and that are coordinated under the project management body of knowledge that are not necessarily project management centric. These are best practices, models that have been pulled from various disciplines. So, for example, when it comes to managing conflict within a team, we will see in class in the later parts of the class, what are the conflict management approaches that are best utilized for specific type of conflict and the outcomes that we want to achieve. And those models, conflict management in and of itself, it can be looked at as a discipline, a fairly robust discipline, give us the ability to be able to effectively manage conflict. When we talk about, for example, motivation and how to best motivate team members, there are many models many theories that we can refer to. One such is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those of you that are interested and want to get a little bit ahead, have a look. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs is just a model that allows us to understand how human behavior is affected by where someone is in terms of their needs. Because the needs guide what can and cannot be achieved through various applications of different approaches to motivation. When we talk about change management and how we effectively deliver change, there are a couple of different models that we can draw from. Cotter's approach to change management is one such, and Prosci ADKAR model is another. And this model creates a framework that we can leverage to determine how to prepare the organization for change by raising awareness, first and foremost, because people are unlikely to change if they're not aware of what the change is and why it's required. Then you have to get people to want to change, i.e., desire. Then you have to give them the knowledge that is required with respect to that change. You have to be able to then allow them to be able to or develop the ability to work in the future state. And then you can't just leave it to chance, but you have to reinforce to make sure that the organization doesn't slip to the old ways of doing things. So this is a model that we can utilize in our project management approaches and planning to be able to ensure that the change sticks and it's effective. There are also other models around motivation, something called intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, which again, these are models that we're going to look at closer in class in the coming weeks. But these are the things that we apply and how they're organized, whether Maslow's hierarchy of needs or intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, whether those models and approaches and skills that are associated with those and their application, whether they reside in one of the knowledge areas, which is obviously under resource, or one of the performance domains, i.e., under team, it's irrelevant. At the end of the day, people work in and on the project, and we have to be able to manage them. And we have to understand that some people are more motivated, some are less motivated. Change is a constant. So, how do we ensure that the change is properly delivered? And when people have conflict, how do we manage that conflict? And again, this is just a very, 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 very small taste of what's to come. But I wanted to give you an example of what we mean by models and a couple of examples on how they're utilized. Again, in class, we're going to talk about many of these methods that I've listed here and then some. But again, this is not intended and cannot be intended to cover all methods within project management. But there are methods, for example, net present value, return on investment. These are methods to be able to understand the financial benefits of any given project. There is also methods to be able to understand how well the project is progressing. For example, earned value analysis. Then there are other methods that maybe help us understand the cause of a particular issue with respect to quality. So root cause analysis, or try to understand, for example, if something goes wrong within the project, what was that root cause so that we can address it next time around. We have things like variance analysis, stakeholder analysis, SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, lessons learned, risk reviews, kickoff meetings, multi-point estimating, and again, just a few small samples of the methods. And again, to stress, these methods are present regardless of whether we're looking at things from a PMBOK 6 or PMBOK 7 perspective. It doesn't matter if we're looking at things from a performance domain or from a knowledge area. These are just present regardless, except their placement and where they sort of fall, if you're looking at it from a performance domain, from a knowledge area, is different. But as a project manager, I don't, and I've stressed this, consciously think when I'm doing the work in terms of defining and planning the project and everything else that's sort of wrapped around it. I don't consciously think about what performance domain I'm in or applying or the knowledge area. It's really about I have a set of tools, I understand my methods and approaches, there's various models, and depending on what I'm trying to do, which model and method do I utilize to help me understand that particular part of the project better so that we can move forward effectively. And so these methods and models are various ways of looking at information and organizing it and transforming the information. And we produce a set of deliverables and or artifacts in the course of the project initialization, planning, and execution and closing of a project. Some, again, I stress just a few examples. This is not meant to be comprehensive, may include the project charter, business case, a project management plan, a test plan, a use case, a user story, project schedule itself, a work breakdown structure. These are all sort of the documents that are produced to help us better understand and plan for and manage the project as it moves forward from its initialization to its completion. Okay, so now I want to use a few specific and real examples of models or methods and artifacts and the connection between the performance domains and the principles of project management. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we are trying to understand the risk and manage the risk within a particular project. So, of course, when we're dealing with risk, we're dealing with uncertainty. And so, from a PMBOK 7 point of view, we are in the quote unquote the uncertainty domain. This is the uncertainty project performance domain. And its whole intent is to be able to help us understand the risks or the opportunities, the threats or the opportunities that are present, and how to effectively define them, qualify them, and quantify them, and then manage them. So, uncertainty are activities and functions that are associated with risk and uncertainty. So, in order to properly define and manage risk, some of the principles of project management that come into play is our ability to navigate complexity. Because remember, this is, you know, something that is absolutely integral to the project manager and the project team. They have to be comfortable and understand that uncertainty is present. They have to be able to deal with that ambiguity, and they have to manage it effectively. That's the expectation. But to manage risk, they also have to engage effectively with stakeholders to understand what are their requirements, what are their expectations, where is the gap between the expectations and what we need to deliver. If there's a gap between a stakeholder expectation with respect to how the process is intended to work or the new application or the tool, between how they need to use it and how it will be used. If there is, for example, negative stakeholders or stakeholders that are not necessarily aware of or accepting of the change, that introduces risk. And so by engaging with stakeholders, we begin to understand potential problem areas. We also have to understand that when we deal with risk, the expectation is that we optimize our risk responses. The whole idea behind project management is no more, no less. And so we need to have the right responses to the risk that we identify. And those are just a few kind of things that come into play. And some of the models then allow us to understand risk and properly characterize it and manage it. For example, is a SWOT analysis, or maybe a stakeholder analysis, or a risk review. Those are different methods that we can employ to be able to get a better sense of the risk and what uncertainty is present in the project and how to best manage it. We also have different models, like, for example, Stacy matrix. So all of these things help us organize or prioritize or understand risk a lot better and maybe be able to understand the source of the risk. And when we look and apply these principles and our guidelines and norms to behavior with respect to risk, and we utilize the various models, not every single model is going to be utilized for every single project. Remember, these are all different tools at our disposal, and we don't always use every single tool in our toolbox to address a problem. It's understanding exactly how much. And this is another sort of aspect about tailoring. If you recall, tailoring is a principle. So how much and which tools do we use? That's a skill that we develop over time. And ultimately, looking at risk and using these various models, what we can do and we ultimately hopefully produce as part of an outcome of this are deliverables and artifacts that are, for example, the project management plan or the risk management plan or a risk register. So that's how all of these things are interconnected with each other. And this is just one example around the uncertainty domain. And I would challenge you to potentially draw a similar diagram like this, looking at one of the other performance domains. So, for example, look at the team performance domain and ask yourself and do a little bit of research. What are the various models and or methods that are applicable to quote unquote the team performance domain? And what are some of the deliverables and artifacts that come as a result of the application of those models and methods when it comes to managing the team and identifying how many resources require and what type of resource and how we communicate and manage and effectively resolve all of those things. And then ask yourself which principles of project management also potentially apply to the notion of the project team performance domain.